It's wonderful to see such a full house this evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm not going to say much more than introduce our speakers this evening. You'll hear more from me later. Chalisée Naamani has held solo exhibitions at Palais de Tokyo, Paris, and Centre d'Art Contemporain Noisy-le-Sec. She's also exhibited her work at numerous institutions in France and also Museum in Luxembourg. And she received the PhD 500 Prize from the Pinacoteca Agnelli, Turin in 2023, and the Benoit Doche de la Fontaine Prize in 2021. Her exhibition at Kunsthalle Wien is the first exhibition of her work here in Austria, and also, I think, the first institutional exhibition of her work outside of France. And I'm delighted that she could be joined this evening by Noit Banai, who's an art historian and critic specializing in modern and contemporary art in the global context. And many of you will know her as the professor of Diaspora Aesthetics at the University of Fine Arts here in Vienna. While teaching at universities and art academies across the world, she's been developing an art historical scholarship on conditions of migration, exile, diaspora, border regimes, and statelessness. Her current research, Stateless, Artistic Life in Shanghai and Hong Kong and Singapore, I might need some of that. Sorry, I might need some light. Otherwise, I can't remember the many wonderful things that Rita's been working on. Yeah. So we stop there. I guess we will learn more into that. Great, thank you. Thank you. Yes, research Statelessness, Artistic Life in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Singapore, 1933 to 1958, analyzes the visual and material negotiation of statelessness by European Jewish refugees who found a safe haven in East and Southeast Asia by Baghdadi, Persian, and Russian stateless people who had been residing there since the mid-19th century and early 20th century, by prisoners of war and internally displaced populations. Her writing has been published in numerous magazines and periodicals, and a forthcoming example is an article entitled Diaspora Aesthetics, Placemaking Between Positionality and Fugitivity. Thank you so much for doing this for us this evening. I know that everybody is excited to see your exhibition, Chalisée, but thank you for foregrounding it with this conversation. The floor is yours.
Good evening, bonsoir, good Abend. Bonsoir, merci d'être venu. Thank you for coming, thank you for joining us, everybody. Thank you to the guard who's taking a photo. Love it. So, we're very, very pleased to have this time together before the opening for some framing, some discussions, some thoughts on Chalisée's work in the context of diaspora, but also other contexts within which her work resides. And I will say a few framing words. We will then watch a clip also that's very important for Chalisée. And from there, we will jump back into the conversation. We will leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So please be prepared for your part in the evening. But without further ado, when I was invited to meet Chalisée and think about her work in this context, I immediately went to a text by Paul Gilroy from 1994. So in 1994, Paul Gilroy wrote a text on diaspora in which he proposes that diaspora is the novel or new sociality of a new millennium. So pre-2000, in a post-colonial context, he's proposing that diaspora is how to think about what comes ahead, the yet to come. And the question, of course, is what is the yet to come today in terms of diaspora? What does diaspora aesthetics do? What are the stakes of positioning an artist and artistic practices within this space? And what does it mean to also consider all the life in between, the subject, as part of this constellation? To continue Gilroy's quote, he writes, "Life itself is at stake in the way the word suggests flight or coerced rather than freely chosen experiences of displacement. Slavery, pogroms, indenture, genocide, and other unnameable terrors have all figured in the constitution of diasporas and the reproduction of a diaspora consciousness." And here's the important part, in which identity is focused less on common territory and more on memory, and more accurately on the social dynamics of remembrance and commemoration. So when I was invited to speak with Chalisée, I thought about what it means to open up the work of an artist who sits at the junction of many identities and many forms of belonging, including, but not only, an Iranian Franco junction or crux. And I thought also about what it meant to not work within a territory, but to work in a polysemic way, in a way that works with codes and networks and images and forms of reproduction that evade certain types of territoriality. I also thought about the permanent condition of being diasporic and what it means for an artist to live in its permanence while also negotiating other types of assimilation, artistic assimilation, familial perhaps assimilation, linguistic assimilation perhaps, while at the same time maintaining a kind of hybridity. So to go back to the central question, or one of the central questions, what does it mean to be a diasporic artist working alongside notions of territory, but not within territories? What does it mean to work with forms of remembrance through artistic practices? What are the shapes? What are the textiles? What are the spaces? What are the sites? What are the strategies that an artist like Chalisée uses to negotiate the push and pull of here and there of diasporic consciousness? And perhaps that's a lot to already impose on you. And we'll see if, maybe how we deal with that. It's not an end point, but a beginning of a conversation. So if that's okay as a framing, I'd like to now move to the clip that Chalisée selected. And would you like to speak about it first, or should we watch it first?
It was about, hello, thank you for being so ready. So the exhibition is titled Octogone, and it was important for me to tell you where it comes from, where was my first inspiration of.
So the Octogone, and we have a short clip of the inspiration.
C'est un art stylisé lui aussi. Il pèse 35 kilos et l'athlète qui le manie a 85 ans. Les villes, comme les hommes, ont parfois une double vie. Ainsi, à Téhéran, capitale d'un pays en plein essor, les Iraniens ont gardé pieusement enfoui en eux le souvenir des traditions millénaires. Qui pourrait laisser dans cette foule anonyme des adeptes des Octogone? Il y a 13 siècles, les Arabes envahissaient l'Iran. Les Iraniens, dans des caves, clandestinement, s'entraînaient pour organiser la résistance. C'est là l'une des origines des mouvements que l'on pratique aujourd'hui encore dans les Octogone. Le Octogone a conservé des mouvements militaires stylisés. Regardez bien. Ceci, c'est la reptation. Voici le saut. La marche. Et la nage. Un arc stylisé lui aussi. Il pèse 35 kilos et l'athlète de Mani a 85 ans.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So you chose this clip to bring us into collective space, but also your personal space, in the social space and the gendered space. Maybe you could tell us why you chose this clip, what the meaning also of the Varsesh, Palavani is for you, and how it intersects at the collective, the individual, personal, social, etc.
So when I was first invited at the Palais Tokyo in Paris, I was inspired by this octagonal geometry that had the space that we could see in the video. So the Zulkhane, it literally means the house of strength. It took place 1,000 years ago, before the Arab invasion in Persia. There were first clandestine caves, when men would surround themselves with many tools to prepare their body to fight the invaders. And it became a national sport through history. So now today it's a national sport. There is a federation. And I was very interested. The name of the sport is Chalisée Naamani. It means traditional sport or ancestral sport. I think it's a very good example of cultural resistance through history, because I read that it has been destroyed every time there was an invasion, and they would rebuild it again and again. And the man that we saw that was playing an instrument, he always gives the rhythm to the exercises. They are kind of military exercises, and he sings many poems. They can also be prayers, and sometimes it's extracts from Shahnameh. That is, it's the Book of Kings. It's a classical book from Persian literature. So when I was saying cultural resistance, it's not only about sport, it's also about poem, it's also about literature, but also about spirituality, because with the Islamization of the Persian society, there was all these spiritual parts that came in through the Zulkhane, so you also have some Sufi dances inside. And I think it's a gymnasium. I think where you learn how to become a man. I was interested about this kind of masculinity, collectivity, that somehow can be beautiful. There are many values that are learned inside. I don't know how to say valeurs chevaleresques.
Chivalrous values.
Yes, like humility, justice, and the architecture has a very specific meaning inside. So there are always this octagonal form that is drawn 1 meter into the ground. And and it's the arena where the athletes train. And it's interesting because Octogone is a form that we find in many cultures in general. Because there were clandestine caves, they had to hide. The doors were always very low, and they kept that in sign of humility. So when you enter Zulkhane, you have to incline yourself to go inside. So yes, that was the first. It was the beginning of the exhibition researches I did.
And thank you. So that was the beginning for your exhibition, also the Palais de Tokyo. And it intersects also with your family story, which is an important aspect also of the transfer of an embodied experience through memory, right? From Iran to France. Through familial networks, genealogies, and storytelling. Maybe you could share a little bit about that if you feel comfortable. Okay.
So I knew the Zulkhane not because I visited one, but because I grew up with some of the tools they use. So in the video, for example, you have to imagine that some of the tools that they are like playing with are like 30, 40 kilos. It's very impressive. So I grew up with some of these tools because my grandfather he was not a Pahlevan, we call them, but his grand cousins were Pahlevans. So when he was younger, he used to go into the Zulkhane, and my grandfather was a wrestler and a boxing fighter. So I think I understood. Sorry for my pronunciations. I have such a Frenchy pronunciation. I'm so sorry.
It's attachment.
I'm so ashamed. Sorry. No, but because half of my family, Iranian diaspora, lives in the United States, so that's why I'm ashamed. I should have a better
We're all
accent.
ashamed if we have a family in the United States. You're doing fantastically. We love your accent.
Sorry. So, yes, I just questioned myself because I think I understood better my grandfather through the Zulkhane. His relation to masculinity. He was like his muscle was even a few months before he dies, he was still like training. The body was something very important, but also the spirituality. He was a very not religious, but he believed in God, and I became a mother 2 years ago. I have a son, and I think I just questioned myself, how do you raise a man today? And all this question about masculinity and I don't know if I can say it.
Yeah, you answered. Thank you very much. You've given us a lot to work with. The question of how to become a man in a certain space, in a collective space with performative actions also that are repeated. And I would then ask, how do you become an artist in that same octagon? You know, it's a kind of reproduction in a certain way, but with a temporal delay, also of you becoming an artist in the octagon. And I think that's also really interesting as a way to think about diasporic relations, but also breaks and reappropriations. And at the same time, you mentioned that there are other places and cultures where octagons are a kind of spatial perimeter for action. And so that also brings us out of your specific, let's say, history to other links, other dialogical conversations around embodiment. And I wonder if you could open up a little bit how your work, not only in the octagon, but also other works that everybody here will see afterwards, how they work with body and space as a place of reproduction.
So I work most of the time through the history of art, but also history of fashion. I had to invent a word, image garments, to define my sculptures. And I think space and body really speak into garments because they're what fascinates the body. And I also always try to, what can I say? I work on garments, but also all the spaces that keep the garments. For example, here you have lockers room that were inspired by because in the Zurkhane you always have this octagonal arena in the middle, and you always have hooks around. Because I found a lot of archives. You can find a lot of archives from Zurkhane, from very old one in black and white as today. And it's really a space where men, you always have like benches around, hooks where they put their clothes, a space of like brotherhood and collective being. So, yeah. I don't know if I...
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that you have, within these kind of fashionable sculptures or sculptural objects, you have multiple levels and layers as well of the body, of different kinds of bodies, of racialized, gendered bodies, but also relationship to codes of fashion and how the codes of fashion produce certain identities. And maybe you could tell us also about some of the motifs that you've chosen to hinge some of these questions around. Why certain motifs in your work?
Yes, so you were talking about layers. I think diasporic identity is never a linear narrative. It's always many fragments that we inherit. So here, sorry, can we show the picture before? Before again, sorry. So here it's a puzzle mat that is inspired by the octogone. So you will see it's an octagonal form. And there is a bunch of, I call it bunch of flowers, but it's a bunch of punching wood. And can I? Actually, I have one on my skirt, but there is this motif that are on the textile, on the puzzle mat. So I was saying that I always work through the history of fashion. I observe what the athletes were actually wearing inside the Zurkhane. So they always wearing this kind of short pants that has this motif on it. And I made some researches because I know this motif because we have them in many textiles at home. We call it beauté gérée in Farsi. But maybe some of you know this motif as motif paisley or motif cashmere, we say. And I discovered that this motif really comes from Persia from 1,000 years ago. I think the oldest one was on architecture, so on a mosque in Afghanistan, but it was the Persia at that time. So on architecture before it comes on actual textile. And I found two different interpretations of this motif. So they say it can be like fire, because at that time the religion was Zoroastrism. Every celebration were about fire, but we don't really have any archaeological proof of that. The other one that we find lots of interpretation is that it's cyprès, the tree, this very cypress tree. And it's inclined because they say that it's the sadness of the nation. It's very Iranian. Very tragic, but it says a lot about this space where initially men would prepare themselves to defend their nation. And I discovered so that this motif traveled from Persia to India in the region of Kashmir, So in India, they would see it as a mango, as a sign of fertility, and they would produce it on very big scarf. And then I vulgarized the story. But with the Silk Road, it traveled to Europe. And why paisley? Because in Scotland there is an industry that produced this paisley motif. I also discovered many drawings of the French royal court where you had this motif on many skirts, but at that time they stopped producing it because it was too famous. And it's funny to see the vision of fashion at that time. So people wanted to be like more original, and it would be the reverse today, I think, with fast fashion. We know we all dress almost the same.
That's what I find also really interesting about your work, is that you have these symbols that really resonate within Farsi, Persian culture, but you also have, the whole Gucci, Hermes extravaganza, which is also a way of coding and class marking and social distinction. But it's an interesting diasporic moment when those two histories intersect. And what that means for a diasporic concept to actually emerge out of this kind of at the interface, right? In 2025, to be scrambling these codes in this way. And you do that in a lot of your work, the scrambling of codes, what we would call in kind of art speak, in a way, palimpsests, but the way that there's one layer after another, but they're also constantly reforming themselves. And that is a very diasporic process, this continuous traveling, the traveling of a concept, the traveling of memory, the traveling of forms. Where else in your work would we, does that work for you, or does that appear?
I think my work is a big collage of forms, but also of ideas. And there's always many layers, because I was saying my identity is never a linear narrative. And I think we don't inherit only stories, but also medias, gestures, conditions, and circulations. And I think also that symbols are never innocent. So that's why I like to play with many symbols. I usually, the boxing glove, the heart, the Eiffel Tower, the Gucci logos are elements I like to play with in my work. And I like the plurality of readings that you can have on for example, a Gucci logo. If it's fake, if it's authentic. Sometimes I wear fake, brands, and people think it's authentic, and sometimes I wear authentic brands and they think it's fake because it's kitsch, for example. And I think that's what interests me in fashion, is that it really shapes the body, not because of what we see, but of what we learned about the body.
That's super interesting when I think about diaspora and the kind of problematics of being positioned in a logo and being authentic diaspora, right? Hashtag authentic diaspora, or being considered fake or appropriating someone else's diaspora, right? It's kind of tension between origin, copy, performance, reproduction, and the relationship between the body and the person who perceives the body is really is active in diasporic imaginations and power formations. And I love that you also do that with fashion and with logos. And I want to now maybe turn a little bit to how you use the photographic or the image-based, because you also, you work a lot with social media, let's say gestures or techniques of social media, I think. Would you say that's correct? Or
yes, I was saying I invented the word image garments because most of the time the final shape is a garment, but I use images that I take with my phone, but also screenshots that I take from the internet, or for example, and I like to, we were talking about layers, so this is a picture of my grandfather that is on a Persian rug. I took a picture of the picture on the rug.
Can we go back to that for a minute so we can see it? Thank you.
So it's the picture I took of a picture on a rug, and then I printed it on a leather, and then I sew it on the back. So I think I just grew up with all this circulation of images, especially through my phone. I use the social media Instagram, and I always say that Instagram is very baroque. It's so many perspective, like infinite perspective. It's like big mosaics of images, and even if you click on an image, you can have several images in one post, and below it you will double click on a heart. Even if you don't like what you see, you will, if you want to make a, like a, how do you say, reaction, thank you. You will always react on double clicking on a heart. I don't know, the emojis, the GIFs, the memes. I think the digital world is very baroque.
That's profound. We could actually speak about this for a long time in terms of where it leads us to. Does it lead us to any kind of transcendence, or just an empty shell, ghost in a shell? I mean, this was just a rhetorical question. But I think what's also interesting is that you make so many references to art history in the longue durée, in the very longue durée. And not only Persian, or, pre-Ottoman, or even Silk Road, but also very much within the history of Western art. And I'm really interested in your fascination with some of these motifs as well. Not that, one cannot have many, be polysemic, but I'm curious about their return. You have certain motifs also return from the history of art, certain angels or characters or...
Yeah, I think I was always fascinated by Renaissance paintings. I think they are my first cultural shocks that I had. One of my first cultural... I felt very small in front of these paintings. And I think what interests me is also that Renaissance is the beginning of perspective. And I grew up with, it's funny because I grew up with Persian miniatures, and perspective is very individualist. You have one point that goes. And in Persian miniatures, you don't have any perspective. You see everything in the same panel. And I think it's the way I tell stories and I compose my work. Everything, I mix everything in the same panel. Yes, you were talking about the paintings. And yeah, history of art is another structure into all the layers, into the framework that I make.
Yeah, and where I kind of also, what I was thinking of as you were speaking about this is how this also updates the notion, some notions in diaspora aesthetics, because the earlier post-colonial writings and W.E. Du Bois and other kind of elders very often write about a double consciousness, right? A double consciousness around diasporic or racialized communities that have experienced rupture. But in your work, we're actually way beyond double consciousness to this basically constant shift, right? I would say many more positionalities that come from the flow of information, that come from this different positionality today that also stands differently to the nation state, if I may say, stands differently to modernity. And maybe that, you know, this is my art historian part speaking also, but can you tell us also a little bit about your education at the École des Beaux-Arts and how you negotiate that kind of, let's say, training? I'd be interested to know a little bit about your parcours through modernity as well to a more than double consciousness.
So I studied at Beaux-Arts de Paris, and so in that school, when you enter the school, you have to choose a studio, and every studio is from a different artist. So I was in Jean-Michel Alberola's studio. It's funny because he's not only a painter. I mean, for me, he's a conceptual artist, but his studio were full of painters, but he also make films. I was in a studio painting, and I was the only one that was not painted. I mean, at the beginning, I was doing drawings, but very quickly, I was making these images, and I mean, I was surrounded by painters. I think there is a pictorial aspect in my work. I always say that my image garments, I don't want them to be worn, but I want them to be seen as if you were watching a painting. I mean, I compose them very intuitively, but I use colors, I use shapes as I would do in a painting. And I was doing these images that I wasn't really satisfied by just putting them on the wall. So one day I just clipped them on a hanger and I made a dressing of images. And then the next step, I don't know why I didn't find the legitimacy to make clothes, because I think I was surrounded by painters and I was not in a fashion school. And I remember one day Jean-Michel Alberola, he came to see me, and after making these images on hangers, I was doing garment covers. And then I was doing hoodies, but never really the garments itself. I was like turning around, and he took one of the hoodie and he said, "Chalisée, you're doing cubism. It's cubism. Look." And he was like turning it around and he said, "Just do garments. What are you waiting for?" So I just started to make garments as I would do painting, using images, and there are actually sculptures inside, installations, and yeah.
Do you want to speak about this work since it just came up?
The one with the wallpaper?
Yes.
So the image you see on the wall is actually a screenshot that I took from a picture that was posted on an Instagram account that is called From Iran. It was created after the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022. What interests me also on Instagram is that it's not only a social tool, it became a space of archives, but also of circulation of information. So this account From Iran is really like a letter, a weekly letter. They gave us information from what's happening currently in Iran. After the death of Mahsa Amini, with the Women's Life Freedom movement, people went into the street and they were writing these political slogans on the wall. So this one is Muhammad Zendegis. It means resistance is life. And you see this like white shape behind the graffiti. It's because the government, they would come and erase the graffiti, but people would come back and rewrite. And here you can't really see it because it was this sentence that I wanted to show, but sometimes you really see all the layers and you see the graffiti behind, and they did it like mouse and cat like 7 times. And Yeah, I think exhibition spaces are a great opportunity to share, to share solidarity without simplification and without illustration. So yes, I put this image on the wall, and in the past you had two images. You had this one, but also another one where you could see the silhouette of the person who was actually writing on the wall. I didn't want it to erase it, so I recreated the shape of the person with an actual garment that is hanged on the tree, on the image.
Thank you. Chalisée, our time is soon coming to an end, and I will take this opportunity to ask you one more question before we open to the public, and that is maybe to speak about one of your new works. You made 8 new works for this exhibition. Maybe you want to speak about one of the 8 new works, and then when you're ready, it's your turn. Maybe you can move to one of the new works.
Maybe I don't know if you have a picture of
Just say
this
stop.
one if you want. Yes. Can I have the previous image, please? Thank you. So you will see the exhibition begins with some suitcases, and it finishes on. There are not luggage, but there are structures that carry usually the suitcases. So this one is more the one from a hotel, and you have another one more from the airport, whatever. So this piece is called Love and Ornament. My first reference, Austrian reference, was Ornament and Crime of Adolf Loos. I don't know if you read it, but I was a bit traumatized by this book because he's literally saying that modernity is about killing the ornament. And sorry, I'm resuming it very badly, but I mean, of course, you have to contextualize the time where he wrote this book, but as a student at that time, for me, it was a very, like a Western point of view on ornaments. I mean, I grew up with Persian rugs everywhere on the floor and sometimes on the wall. So, I mean, I really grew up with ornament. So yeah, it's just my love and ornament, my love of ornament. And this heart that is shaping all the installation you have inside the coat. These are the traditional Austrian coats, and inside you have I Love Vienna, and these bags with this heart. And it's funny because we can really recognize this heart. I mean, for me, I see the I Love New York. Even if you've never been to New York, everyone has seen this. Yes, very kitsch and.
Well, thank you. I think this is a good place to stop also, because with polysyllabic and this idea of collaging and layering your way through different histories and positionalities, diasporic and post-millennial as well, in terms of what it means expanding diasporic aesthetics. We don't have time to continue in that direction tonight, but I think you opened up a lot of new pathways through which to continue a conversation around forms of embodiment, community, memory that don't collapse into either illustration or territoriality, which is where the Paul Gilroy quote also began. And now I would like to invite the public. If there's anybody who would like to pose a question, you're more than welcome to. Yes.
I can pose it in English, but my mother tongue is so French. Without simplification and without too much affirmation, but I was struck by the political moment where you talked about the movement Femme de Liberté. And I was wondering, can you say just one more thing about your own interest for politics, or is it more like a side thing, in France or in Iran or both?
Culture is always political, I think. Fashion is political. The body is, I mean, I'm a woman, I'm Iranian, so I mean, politics is everywhere on my body. It's weird, to be very honest, it's weird to open this exhibition today because there's a mass killing happening right now in Iran. There's an internet blackout. And I couldn't anticipate that we will open this exhibition in this context, but I think, thank you for your question, because it's important to say it tonight, even if I am not like, I am not a politician, I'm an artist, and I think Iran is my identity, but it's not me as an artist. It's so important for me to say that. Voilà, like it's, I just wish that freedom for them.
Any other questions for Chalisée? Yes, I see some hands over there.
So, me, you can.
Hi, thank you so much for being with us here in person tonight and for sharing a lot of both personal insights into your work. And I'm curious to hear more about your research process as you do these different projects. You mentioned some work in archives. But yeah, I would like to hear more about how you structure and conceptualize your work.
It's a bit chaotic. I just follow my instinct. I don't know. Like, for example, I was invited at the Palais de Tokyo, so the space that was given to me has this octagonal form. It reminded me of the Zulkhane. I made many research on the Zulkhane. Then I asked myself, oh, what they were wearing inside this gym. So I started to make researches on their actual pants. And then I looked at this paisley motif and I was like, where does it come from? So I made some research on the paisley motif. Then I needed a bit more information about my grandfather. So, you know, and at the time I do researches, I collect images. And sometimes inside these images, I choose one to print it and use it inside an actual installation. And I don't know, like I'm just curious, and sometimes I've listened to music and of a pop star and I'm like, oh, this quote would be great for a title of my new sculpture. Yeah, it's a very, very large collage in my work, so I just take whatever talk to me.
Thanks. So in these works, I see a lot of symbols that are like this one on the wall. No, it's not there anymore. It's like symbols of resistance. I also see many symbols that I would see as assimilation. And then just curious what these two, if these two have a relationship for you, if they are like opposites, polar opposites, or one like brings the other up. If you have any.
I'm so sorry, I didn't really understand the question, so sorry. Can you repeat?
I just wondered if there's like any sentiment, like some idea from you, if there's a relation between like resistance and assimilation, or if I'm wrong about the assimilation part. Thinking of diasporic.
Assimilation in what way?
in the way like the typical Austrian garment that we saw, and like this typical hard thing. I love Vienna, I love New York, the traveling thing, like accommodating to new spaces and stuff like that. Sorry if it's a weird question or
No,
hard
it's
one.
me, it's sorry.
Can we both answer it? No, I think you're. Oh, I think they're shutting down our mics. It's interesting, assimilation into which industry and which kind of global network are you talking about? You know, are you talking about assimilation into administration, into global capital of tourism, luxury lifestyles, all of the above? Are you talking about kind of concepts of integration politique? You know, assimilation has many resonances. So I think all of these could be at play. But I don't know if they're always in diametrical opposition in Chalisée's work, because I don't think she works so much in binaries as I see it, but in constantly changing our positions where you can read things from different ways. That's how I see it.
I don't like the word assimilation.
All right. No, that's a statement. Thank you.
Yes. And also all these researches that I made, for example, this motif, paisley, cashmere. I mean, we talk about cultural appropriation a lot today, and it's important to talk about it, but I think it's also interesting to see how there's been an hybridation and crossing cultures. I mean,
Creolisation, hybridization, etc.
yes, since thousands and thousands of years. And
Good
it's
question.
just-
Thank you for raising it. Yes, thank you. Any other questions before we go into the main space for wonderful speeches? Yes.
Thank you. I was wondering, after all the great, thank you very much, artistic research you did, and also this very personal question, and I'm very thankful for you sharing this about how to raise a man, of course, nowadays, and also the way you keep research and keeping related with this maybe very problematic masculine tradition of this very powerful movements and visual images even. Do you have somehow an answer? Did you catch this maybe as an outcome of the artistic research you had? And if you could share, maybe you would, referring to your question, how to raise a man, because
Want an answer?
honestly, I'm really interested in the answer. I would say just because this is the motives and
I think the
projects
answer
you're
is-
working with.
You know, in France, you have this collage in the streets that's all called feminist collage. There are always white papers and black letters on them, and they're like feminist slogan on them. And there is one I love is "Éduquez vos fils." It means just raise your sons. And I mean, I'm nobody to say how to raise a man today, but I mean, in a very binary world we live in today, I think I also wanted to celebrate femininity, but also masculinity in when it actually works. I mean, all these values, this brotherhood that we see in the Zorgone, justice, humility, yeah, I think they're interesting, and I like to play with like very coded feminine things in fashion, for example, and mixing them with very coded male. I don't know, I think neutrality doesn't really exist, and you just have to shape your own, I I don't really have the answer. I just try to be a good person. Like by being a good person, I try to be a good mother. But we'll see if my son becomes a good man. I don't know.
This was our last question.